You know that feeling when you check your account balances and the numbers look fine, maybe even impressive on paper, but something still feels off? Like you're carrying this invisible weight around your chest that never quite lifts, no matter how much you earn or how many zeros show up in your investment statements? I've been thinking about this for years now, and I've talked to hundreds of people who experience exactly this. They've done the right things. Maxed out retirement accounts, paid off the student loans, built portfolios that would make their 25-year-old selves proud. And yet they still lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering if it's going to be enough. Wondering what happens if everything doesn't go exactly according to plan. Here's what I've realized. If net worth alone was the answer, if accumulating assets was the whole game, then most high earners would feel calm by now. They don't. Not even close. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because I think there's something that matters more than net worth once you hit your 40s. And almost nobody is talking about it. Hey, I'm James. I spend most of my time thinking about money, specifically the psychology of it, how we make decisions, where we trip up, and what actually creates lasting financial peace. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like something's missing from the conventional financial wisdom out there, hit that subscribe button. I try to explore the stuff that doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. So let's get into it. The standard advice you hear about building wealth is pretty straightforward. Grow your net worth. Save more. Invest consistently. Watch that number climb year after year. And look, that advice isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. It's like telling someone that the key to a happy marriage is just being legally married. Technically true, but it misses the entire point. Net worth measures accumulation. It counts what you've piled up, but it doesn't measure control. It doesn't capture freedom. It doesn't tell you whether you can actually breathe when something unexpected happens. Here's a statistic that might surprise you. According to a Goldman Sachs report, around 40% of Americans earning between $300,000 and $500,000 annually say they're living paycheck to paycheck. 40%. These are people with six-figure incomes, often with significant net worth on paper, and they still feel trapped. That's not a math problem. That's a structural problem. The issue is that many high earners have grown their assets while simultaneously shrinking their freedom. They've built wealth while destroying margin. So what is margin? It's the space between what you have to do and what you can do. It's financial and mental breathing room. It's the buffer that absorbs shocks so they don't break you. I like to think of it this way. Imagine you're driving down the highway. Net worth is how much fuel you have in the tank. Margin is how much room you have between your car and the car in front of you. You can have a full tank of gas, but if you're tailgating at 80 miles an hour with no space to brake, one unexpected move, and you're done. The fuel didn't save you because you had no margin for error. Margin looks like different things in real life. It's a cash buffer that can handle 6 months of expenses without touching investments. It's lower fixed obligations, meaning your monthly commitments don't consume 80% of your income. It's flexibility in decisions, the ability to say no to a bad opportunity or yes to a great one without panic. And maybe most importantly, it's time that isn't pre-sold. Time you haven't already committed to someone else just to keep the lights on. Think about it this way. Net worth is your total score. Margin is how many timeouts you have left in the game. And here's why margin becomes absolutely critical after 40. First, you have fewer do-overs. When you're 25 and you make a financial mistake, you have decades to recover. Markets will cycle. You'll get promotions. There's time. At 45, that runway shortens significantly. The average person has maybe 20 good working years left. Bad decisions carry more weight because there's less time to course correct. Second, you often have more dependents. Kids hitting college age, aging parents who might need help, a partner counting on you. The web of people relying on your financial stability gets more complex, not less. Third, there are health and energy constraints you didn't have to think about before. Your capacity to grind through 70-hour weeks to dig out of a hole diminishes. Recovery from setbacks takes longer, physically and mentally. And fourth, the cost of mistakes just goes up. Getting fired at 28 is a story you tell at parties. Getting fired at 52 can derail retirement plans you've been building for decades. I've seen this play out so many times. Someone in their late 40s gets laid off unexpectedly. If they have margin, they take a few weeks to decompress, then thoughtfully pursue opportunities that excite them. If they don't have margin, they panic take the first job that comes along, often accepting less money or worse conditions than they deserved, just because they couldn't afford to wait. This is why chasing net worth alone can actually backfire. You can have $1 million in retirement accounts, substantial home equity, and still feel terrified. because you have 2 kids in private school, a mortgage that requires both incomes, a car payment approaching $750 a month, and exactly 6 weeks of cash on hand. According to Experian data, the average new car payment in 2025 is around $748 per month. The average loan term is nearly 70 months. That's almost 6 years of payments. And according to the National Association of Home Builders, a typical family now needs to spend about 36 to 38% of their income just to cover mortgage payments on a medium-priced home. Add the car, the insurance, the property taxes, the subscriptions, the lifestyle expenses that seemed reasonable when you signed up for them, and suddenly there's nothing left over. Your net worth might be growing, but your margin has evaporated. This is what economists call lifestyle creep, and it's insidious because it happens slowly. You get a raise, so you upgrade the car. Your bonus comes in, so you take a nicer vacation. The house feels small, so you trade up. Each decision feels justified in isolation. But the cumulative effect is that your fixed costs rise to meet and sometimes exceed your income. There's fascinating research in behavioral economics about what's called scarcity mindset. Professor Eldar Shafir at Princeton and economist Sendhil Mullainathan have studied this extensively. What they found is that when people feel like they don't have enough, whether it's money or time or energy, it consumes what they call mental bandwidth. It takes up brain power that would otherwise go to planning, problem solving, and long-term thinking. In one particularly striking study, researchers went to a shopping mall and gave people cognitive tests while having them think about financial scenarios. When participants thought about a manageable expense, like a $150 car repair, lower income and higher income people performed equally well on the tests. But when they thought about a larger expense, around $1,500, the poorer participants showed significantly worse cognitive performance. The mere act of contemplating a financial stress reduced their mental capacity. The wealthier participants showed no such decline. This has profound implications. The stress of financial uncertainty literally makes you dumber at handling financial decisions. It creates a tunnel vision effect where you can only focus on immediate problems, losing sight of longer-term solutions. This is why financial stress makes you worse at making financial decisions. Your mind is so focused on putting out immediate fires that it can't think strategically. And here's the kicker. This effect shows up even in people who aren't objectively poor. If you feel financially stretched, if you feel like there's no cushion, your cognitive capacity takes a hit. So 2 people might have identical net worth, but the one with margin, with breathing room, actually makes better decisions. They can think long term. They can evaluate opportunities without desperation. They're not operating from a place of constant low-level fear. Let me put some simple numbers on this. Imagine you're 43 years old, earning $150,000 a year. You've got $400,000 in retirement accounts. On paper, you're doing great, but your monthly expenses are structured so that you need $12,000 just to cover everything, and you're bringing home around $9,000 after taxes and retirement contributions. The gap is covered by your spouse's income, but there's basically nothing left at the end of the month. Now imagine you're the same age, same income, but you've made different choices. Your monthly expenses are $7,000. You have $30,000 in cash savings. Your retirement account is smaller at $300,000, but you're saving an extra $500 a month and building your cash buffer. Who sleeps better? Who has the ability to walk away from a toxic work situation? Who can handle a surprise medical expense without touching retirement funds? Who can take a calculated risk on a career change that might lead to more fulfillment and potentially more money down the road? The person with lower net worth but higher margin has more real-world options. They've preserved optionality, which might be the most valuable financial asset there is. According to the Federal Reserve's 2024 Survey of Household Economics and Decision-Making, about 55% of adults have enough emergency savings to cover 3 months of expenses, which means 45% don't. And among people who would need to handle a $400 emergency expense, 37% would have to borrow, sell something, or simply couldn't pay at all. This isn't just a problem for low-income households. A Bankrate survey found that 59% of Americans couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency expense with savings. And with the U.S. personal savings rate hovering around 4 to 5% of disposable income in recent years, down from over 30% during the pandemic peak, most households just aren't building buffers. So how do people rebuild margin? It's not complicated, but it requires deliberately going against the grain of what everyone around you is probably doing. First, simplify spending. This doesn't mean becoming a monk. It means auditing your fixed costs ruthlessly. That subscription you forgot about? Cancel it. The car that was a stretch when you bought it? Consider what it would mean to drive something cheaper when the lease ends. The lifestyle upgrades that crept in after your last raise? Question whether they're actually making you happier or just making you feel more trapped. Second, delay upgrades. This is hard because our culture constantly tells us we've earned better. And maybe you have. But delaying a kitchen renovation by 2 years, or keeping the perfectly functional car for another 36 months, can create substantial margin. Remember, every fixed cost you add is a commitment of future income. It's selling your future time to pay for present stuff. Third, and this is crucial, build buffers before chasing returns. I know it feels inefficient to have cash sitting in a savings account earning 4% when the stock market historically returns around 10% annually over long periods. But that cash buffer isn't primarily an investment, it's insurance. It's the thing that keeps you from having to sell stocks at the worst possible time, or take a predatory loan, or stay in a job that's destroying your health because you have no runway. The stocks you didn't sell at the bottom. The desperate job you didn't accept. The health costs you didn't incur from chronic financial stress. That's real value, even if it doesn't compound in a spreadsheet. The historical average annual return of the S&P 500 is around 10% with dividends reinvested, going back nearly a century. But that average masks enormous year-to-year volatility. There are years it drops 38%, years it loses nearly 20%. If you're forced to sell during those moments because you have no margin, you lock in losses that can take years to recover from. Here's the psychological shift that matters most. Calm comes from not needing everything to go right. Think about that. When you're stretched thin, when every dollar is accounted for, when there's no slack in the system, you need everything to work. You need the job to stay stable. You need the car not to break down. You need the roof not to leak. You need the kids not to get sick when you're up against a deadline. You're one bad month away from crisis. But when you have margin, when there's buffer in your finances and time in your schedule, you can absorb hits. Not everything has to be perfect. You've built shock absorbers into your life. Here's what's interesting. Building margin isn't just a financial strategy. It's an identity shift. The process of creating financial breathing room forces you to become a different kind of person. You have to get comfortable saying no. You have to delay gratification. You have to resist the pull of comparison with people around you who seem to have more. And if you can do that for a few years, something changes inside you. You prove to yourself that you can control your money instead of letting it control you. You develop a skill set, the ability to think long term, to resist impulse, to sit with discomfort. That transfers to every other area of life. The margin you build in your finances starts to show up as margin in your relationships, your health, your career decisions. This is the difference between surviving and thriving. Survival is grinding through, hoping nothing goes wrong. Thriving is knowing that when things do go wrong, and they will, you'll be okay. Let me talk about how this plays out in your career. Because margin doesn't just affect your bank account. It affects your negotiating power. There's a concept sometimes called walk-away money. It's having enough saved that you could leave your current job and survive for 6 months, 12 months, while you find something better. Most people don't have this. According to various surveys, roughly half of workers feel they can't afford to be unemployed for even 1 month. Think about what that does to your position at work. If you can't walk away, your employer knows it. You take the projects nobody wants. You don't push back on unreasonable demands. You don't ask for the raise you deserve because the risk of rocking the boat feels too high. You're effectively trapped by your own lifestyle commitments. But with margin, everything shifts. You can negotiate from strength instead of desperation. You can say no to the promotion that's really just more responsibility for 5% more pay. You can invest in training or certification that might temporarily cost money, but dramatically increases your earning potential. You can take intelligent risks that people without margin simply can't afford. The feedback loop here is powerful. Better finances create more confidence. It's a virtuous cycle, but it starts with margin. Now, let me be honest about the mistakes I see people make. Because even when people understand all this conceptually, they still blow it in predictable ways. The biggest trap is treating savings milestones as spending rewards. You finally hit $100,000 in savings, and you celebrate by buying something expensive. You pay off your student loans, and you immediately upgrade your apartment. The milestone became a trigger for lifestyle inflation instead of a foundation for building more margin. Another common mistake is the too soon upgrade. The housing market is a classic example. You could afford your current place comfortably, but you qualify for a mortgage that's 30% bigger, so you stretch. Now you're house poor. Your net worth might look better because you own more real estate, but your monthly margin has been demolished. Cars are even worse because they depreciate. The average new car payment approaching $750 a month means you're committing nearly $9,000 a year to something that's actively losing value. Over a 5 or 6 year loan term, that's $45,000, plus interest, plus insurance, plus maintenance. If you had put that money into index funds, earning the historical average of around 10%, you'd be looking at a fundamentally different financial picture a decade later. I'm not saying never buy a nice car. I'm saying understand the true cost, including the opportunity cost, and make sure your margin can absorb it without stress. Over-leveraging with debt is another killer. It feels smart to use cheap money to buy appreciating assets, and in a rising market, it can look brilliant. But leverage magnifies losses too. When things go wrong, and eventually things always go wrong somewhere, debt accelerates the damage. So what should you do instead? Let me give you some principles rather than rigid rules because your situation is unique. Build a realistic emergency fund and don't touch it for non-emergencies. This means 6 months of actual expenses in cash or cash equivalents. Yes, it feels like dead money. It's not. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. Keep big fixed costs under control. Housing and transportation are the 2 biggest line items for most households. If you can keep those from expanding every time your income goes up, you'll naturally build margin over time. Automate saving and investing so it happens before you see the money. Behavioral economists have shown that we spend what we have available. Remove the availability. Focus on increasing income over time. Cutting costs only gets you so far. Eventually, you need to earn more. But earn more without proportionally increasing commitments, and you're building margin. Don't chase hot tips or try to time the market. Over long periods, simple index fund investing has outperformed most active strategies. The S&P 500's compound annual growth rate has been roughly 10% over the past century. You don't need to be clever, you need to be consistent. And perhaps most importantly, define enough for yourself before the world defines it for you. Without a clear picture of what financial security actually means to you, you'll chase an ever-receding finish line. More becomes the default goal, and more never feels like enough. Here's what I want you to remember from this entire conversation. After 40, margin matters more than net worth. The person with $300,000 in investments and $40,000 in the bank, who spends $4,000 a month, has more freedom than the person with $600,000 in investments and $2,000 in the bank, who spends $12,000 a month. One can weather storms. The other is one bad quarter away from crisis. True financial security isn't about reaching some magic number. It's about creating a life where you have room to maneuver, room to breathe, room to make choices based on what you actually want rather than what you're forced to accept. I'll leave you with this question. If you looked at your life right now, not your account balances, but your actual lived experience, would you say you have margin? Could you handle a major unexpected expense without panic? Could you walk away from your job tomorrow and survive for 6 months? Do you have time in your week that isn't already sold to someone else? If the answer to any of those is no, it might be time to rethink not how much you're accumulating, but how much freedom you're actually building. I'd love to hear from you. What's one financial decision you've made that either created margin or accidentally destroyed it? Drop it in the comments below. I read everything, and I think we can learn a lot from each other's experiences. And if this gave you a new way to think about money, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.